Before we get started, I'd just like to say this. You know, one thing that is very essential is continuity. You cannot understand a lot of this stuff if you do not have continuous attendance. Just sporadic attendance. It's funny, in the hospital here, I've had people say to me, like the man down there tonight, the receptionist, he said, "Oh, I must pop up sometime." Somebody else said, Father so-and-so said this, and Dr. so-and-so said this. "Oh, I might pop in sometime." They never come. But it's all right. They'll learn something. It may have their curiosity stimulated, so they might want to come in future. But continuity of the course produces a tremendous reward because philosophy hangs together systematically. Are you right? Tonight, since we're going through a great problem with the economy, I'd like to say a couple of things if they wanted to fix the economy, if they'd only listen to. This is taken from ethics, and not only from ethics but long experience of a lot of people, including economists, where I came from. The Aquinas Academy in Sydney was very advanced in socio-economics. Two things. One is stopping anti-productive investment. Now, I wrote a paper in which I summarized that, the two faces of capitalism. I sent it to everybody. If you want to get that paper, please let me know. Give me a name and I'll send it to you. But I thought I'd send it out to everybody. The two faces of capitalism. Two absolutely opposite things are expressed in the term capitalism. One is where we invest money to produce goods and services. The other one is where we spend money to stop production of goods and services. We estimated in Australia that 4 times as much money is spent stopping production as is spent producing. And governments are not exempt from it either. So, one company with whom I have some savings invested said the future looks good. This is a year or two back. The future looks good with all these new takeovers, etc. A lot of money being made here. The future looks good when some are being put out of business, when they invest to stop opposition, which they call competition. The term competition means seeking together, seeking the common good of the body economic, saving of effort and saving of time. That's the common good of the body economic. Leisure is the common good. I heard it pronounced our way the other day, leisure. They said leisure or leisure, whichever you like to call it. I was rather surprised. I thought it was only pronounced one way in the United States, leisure. That's one thing. The other thing that will cure the body economic is what the Center for Economic and Social Justice is teaching in Washington. And I was delighted when I learned this, because we've been teaching that since I can remember at the age of 20 talking about this. Namely, share profiting with the employees. Let them become part owners in the enterprise. Let them become share owners in the enterprise. That would be an excellent thing. So those two things. One, the government should legislate against anti-productive investment whenever there's suspicion. The Taft Act years ago tried to do something with that. It's gradually slipped into the background and men are getting away with it, even praising people who do it. I had from Canada alone numbers, in fact I was collecting them, the takeovers in Canada, the dates and takeovers, etc. And banks were taking over grocery stores. Grocery stores were taking over hardware stores. Everybody taking somebody over to expand their efficiency to cover their own inefficiency, which is really what it amounts to. But if they had their employees sharing in the place, that would happen. I'll tell you the story of Megget oil industry in Australia, where it happened. One Friday they got the men together and said, "We can't pay you. We're out of money. We've got a suggestion to make. We could pay you in shares, or if you'd wait a few days, we're borrowing money to pay you." Most of the men, if not all of them, I can't remember now, they chose to accept shares. Meg's oil industry just flourished. Magnificent oil industry. They make all sorts of refined oils, something that as a pharmacist interested me very much, with what's called the essential and fixed oils. But they were mainly in essential oils. That is to say, the highly smelling ones, the beautiful ones, not the fixed oils like castor oil, olive oil, peanut oil. Anyway, they produced all these beautiful fine oils and lots of byproducts for the medical industry as well as the commercial industry. So I saw firsthand what happened to them. They flourished. There was an electrical company in Australia that did the same thing. And in Canada, Antigonish, a Jesuit suggested to the fishermen that they should go out and start their own company, a credit union. They started that, share ownership, got their own freezing works, and no longer could some company say to them, well, you've got half a case of fish today, or 1.5. We're not interested in that. And the poor man was stuck with his catch for a day's work. They started under the influence of a Jesuit from the University of St. Francis Xavier, and they flourished by buying their own freezing works, borrowing money and floating a loan as a credit union, and did very well. So ownership. Every man is by nature inclined to be an owner. We all know what own means, O-W-N. It equals O-W-E-D. Own is an Old English past participle for owed. What is my own is owed by you. Keep your cotton picking hands off, if you like. So that would solve the problems of this country. I send copies of my paper to a number of important people. I'm going to send out 2 or 3 more to people who should be listening. And it received praise from the Center of Economic and Social Justice in Washington, D.C. But it merely says, eliminate anti-productive investment. Aristotle relates 2 instances, and St. Thomas relates 1 instance. If you've got the paper, I've recorded the references and everything in there. When I first saw those references, I was delighted, because I knew about the principles involved, but I didn't know those 3 references by the ancient scholars. So that would cure, I think, overnight, if they'd do something like that. But this idea of borrowing money to lend it to them to help them out of their stupidities, economists that I have respect for have said this is utterly the wrong way to go. The government bailing them out like that, rewarding them for their stupidities. So having said that, my friends, those 2 things I wanted to mention tonight about continuity of study is very important. And the ability we have to get out of this great thing, but it's a great job for any government to do. I don't think that any government we've got now would be capable of it.
You need prudent men.
You need prudent men, exactly. Men, and you mean good men. That's why Plato wrote about the philosopher kings. He wrote about the philosophers should be the governors of a state because they're the least interested. They'd get the job done quickly and not make a career out of it. Then go back to philosophizing. There's a lot of truth in what Plato says. He said, get men that are not just interested in making a career. Now you've got somebody who's probably, his career was in football or maybe in the army or something else. And now he can stand for government and like that pompous idiot that I went to school with in Australia. He's had parks named after him and he would stand before the audience and he was very pompously telling us about how the body politic worked. And you know more about it than a little child is. However, as I said to somebody, the common good, what's that? Like my friend Father Anthony, he had a voice down there, way down below, I can't get down that deep. And he said to a lecture at the Australian Communist Party about dialectical materialism. And of course, he knew much more about it than the man who was lecturing. He said, what's dialectical materialism? He said, oh, you'll learn about it someday, and he bypassed the question straight away. That's the kind of thing you get sometimes from these people, like somebody asked what the common good was recently on television. And he answered everything but what was the common good. The common good is the good of the totality and the good of each part. And common goods are always non-material goods. Peace, order, freedom, justice, civic friendship, a well-informed public opinion, they're common goods. Public goods, now the public good is the good of the totality, the United States. Common good is the good of the United States and each individual. The public good is the good of the totality only, though sometimes ancient philosophers use them interchangeably. Public goods are concrete, material goods used by the state to preserve the common good. For instance, police cars, prisons, courts, government buildings, they're public goods, and they're employed in the preservation of the common good. Students, when I was at the University of Ottawa, were piling in, because the University of Ottawa was the biggest bilingual university in the world. When I went there, my first year, 6 courses, 3 in each semester, were all in English. After that, they became all in French. And when they found out I was bilingual. But I was constantly hearing from French students that sciences sociales, social sciences, that's what we need today, social sciences. I said, what about ethics? Oh, we don't know. Everybody knows what ethics is. The 4th part of ethics concerns the body politic and tells you what is necessarily true of the body politic. Not just what is contingently true, which science, social sciences studies. It merely studies what we've observed. But ethics studies what must be, what ought to be, better still, what should be in society. Not what is, but what should be. But always remember that between the 2 modes of science. Philosophical sciences concern what, in the ethics, what ought to be. And because man is free, he can deviate from that and do silly things. Well, I think I've said enough of that. We developed that thoroughly in ethics. Oh, the common goods, by the way, are non-material goods. And anybody, by the more we give each to it, the more each gets out of it. And thirdly, nobody loses by anybody taking from it. If you enjoy the peace, freedom, order in society, nobody else loses anything. Perfectly divisible. So now we get back to our philosophical psychology. I had to make that little deviation, and perhaps another one I could make concerns what I've heard from only last night on WNED FM, which you know, oh not FM, I'm sorry, TV, which you know has a session going on the Bible. I heard a number of very serious errors. Here's one. How did this idea of a God come up? Well, they had all these gods and gradually they dropped away one by one. It's exactly what's said to, and one was left, said to me by the Australian Communist Party in a dispute I had with them publicly on one occasion. Exactly the same thing. You're only accepting one, it'll soon go. And as Moscow Radio said on one occasion, when we know more about science, we'll lose that one. It's just the opposite. The truth is, every primitive race had the idea of one God. The Australian Aborigines, the North American Indians, the Aztec, any race, and they've all had the notion of a God. There was always one God. And it's the decay of a civilization that brought about multiple gods. Like in ancient Rome, Caesar now considers himself a god. Caesar, of course, always meant the president of the republic and the emperor. They thought that they invented gods for certain conveniences always. The same with the Egyptians. And this was when the civilization had advanced, not when it broke down. There was always the notion of one God first, and then they started inventing gods. So where did this idea of one God come from? My blood can boil when I hear some of the errors I hear on television. And WNED always criticizes by faint praise. It has a very shrewd method of approaching these things. And then Aiken in Canada, Mr. Aiken on TVO. I wrote to him and told him that you can prove there is a God. He just ignored it. They just ignore it. They don't even try to dispute with you when you have the truth. So you can take it not with a grain of salt. I'll give you a pound of salt to take with each of those things. I have no trust in those people who are extremely dishonest in scholarship. I remember I was up in the Laurentian Mountains. Father Geiger was there. Now this man, there was somebody in Australia who had studied in Europe at Rome and said to me, "You studied under Father Geiger? You lucky devil." I studied with him, and I was the only person he gave permission to see when I wanted to. I was so close to him. He was my director, the principal director of my doctoral research. And Geiger was a great man. And I remember he was in Professor Muir, and he invited my wife and me to their country cottage in the mountains. And Geiger was up there too. And he was pulling up weeds and pulling up little bushes little trees to transport them to another place. I thought, this man in shorts looked so funny, this Dominican father, without his habit, the only way I'd ever seen him before. And he looked so funny, so skinny and so bald-headed. And I remember saying something to him. "Comment ça, Monsieur Waters? How is that, Monsieur Waters?" he said. "I don't understand that." But he listened to me. A great man listening to me, a damn student at the time. But this is what you get from great men. I heard this from Woodbury. I told him when we were up on the farm at St. Michael's Orphanage, directing the breeding of cattle, etc. I said, when you're washing things out with milk, always rinse them first with cold water. It stops the separation of oils and water. As a pharmacist, I knew these things. "Oh, is that right? Oh, I see, I'll try that then." But great men listen. But these, to use a Canadian expression, and the original expression, I hope it's not considered too vulgar in the United States, these piddling minds don't see a darn thing about the truth, or not interested in listening to the truth. Like a man once said, "Oh, I wouldn't bother to talk to you. You've got some religious nutty idea in your mind," and walked away from me. When I happened to mention the word God. This is pride. And that's an occasion when I think argumentum ad hominem is necessary. Argument against the person. Like one man, I said, "You're too bloody proud to be taught anything, aren't you? You think you know it all." Boy, did it sting him. Something like that you've got to say sometimes. About, "Oh, this will be over your head," or something like that. Talk down to them. And they react immediately. You've got to sting their pride sometimes. A student once asked me that, is it ever lawful to use an argumentum ad hominem? Argument against the man. That's what it means. Yes, it is sometimes, when you've got to startle them out of their pride. Forgive me, Lord. Forgive me, fellows. So now we'll start off where we were, about page 37, weren't we? Yes. We saw that objectivity means that we attain the thing outside the mind. A man who I was shocked at doctorate level said this in Montreal. Father Regis said, "What does the intellect know?" And this man said, "The idea." Regis nearly fell off his feet off it. "No, not the idea. What we know is the thing itself. The idea is there only to represent the thing. It's the tree itself we know." That man now, I was appalled at, I knew him well, he was a friend of mine. And I was appalled at his ignorance at doctorate level. He's now a professor in the University of Montreal. What do they say about teachers? What those who teach do. Those who can't teach the teachers. It's an old saying. Even Elizabeth finds that funny. So, remember, acts, habits, and powers are distinguished by their formal objects. The object, the form in the object. That's what the mind goes after. So, but the intellect always knows it as an existing thing, a being. It doesn't just know the color of the thing, the size or the shape or the movement. It knows the thing as it is a being. And whatsoever being is, the intellect can get at. God's a being, so it can know God, but only in our human way. By comparing him with tadpoles, or trees, or kangaroos. And you know what you get when you cross a kangaroo with a bottle of whiskey, don't you? A wobbly wallaby. I told him that down in the Florida Zoo, and the woman she was tending some wallabies there, and she nearly ran a spike through me.
So does the imagination always have to have a picture with it?
The imagination always gives pictures, always, yes. Do you mean, does the intellect have to have a picture with it?
Yes.
That's what you really mean, isn't it? Yes, I can see behind the question. Yes, always. The image is always there because the intellect operates in contact with the singular. Even when it has a new picture, a new concept, it has to form a new picture.
So when someone is blind from birth,
Or both.
from birth,
Oh, from birth. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, they have a problem. Helen Keller, that was her problem. She could have no idea of certain things because she had to have some image, and she had no image because she was blind. Now, there was the girl in Paris at the beginning of the last century. They tried and tried and tried. Wundt and all these famous psychologists were trying to get her to understand, as W-U-N-D-T, trying to understand the nature of red, what redness was. And finally one day she said, I've got it at last. I can see what you mean now. Red is like the sound of a trumpet. It's not the sound of a trumpet. It's only like it. She knew no more about red then than she had before. She had terrible trouble. These psychologists were trying to see if she could learn something in terms of hearing, and it just doesn't work. Yes, sister?
I think Helen Keller had one image, and that's what broke it for her.
Exactly.
That was water.
Water, yes.
She had that perception of water,
Yeah.
and that carried her
Exactly.
after that, when
What
she
a-
realized that.
What a terrible life if she didn't have that, eh? You've
Right.
got to, and we have no images unless something has come through the imagination first. It's got to come through the imagination first, and then we can form a concept from that. But it must come through, and the concept, the intellect, there's no such thing as imageless thought.
You can touch water, but you can't touch red.
No, that's true. That's the whole point. She said it's like red, but I'm sorry. What was it? Red? Like the sound of a trumpet. She had hearing. You see, this girl in Paris. Yes, you can't touch red. There was a man in Australia, Scrivener, who was a famous cattle judge, and he was well known to Father Woodbury, who, by the way, trained cattle judges. That man was extraordinary. He was judging Australian cattle. The Australian Illawarra Shorthorn was magnificent. The number of 1,000-pounders, they measure cows by 1,000 pounds of butter fat in a year. And they had a number of 1,000-pounders. There's only been so many since the history of the world, you might say. Anyway, Scrivener would go and judge cattle, and he was blind. I'm not sure whether he's blind from birth. I think he was. But he didn't know the colour of the... And he'd say, oh, there's red hair here and there's white hair there. He knew the coarseness of red hair as compared with white hair. That's what he really knew. Touch is the only.
so are you classifying that as an image? Is that an image?
Oh yes, there must be an image, yes. Oh yes, there must be still an image. Because the intellect operates on forms as they exist in the singular. The intellect always operates on forms. Even to form, we're going to come to that shortly, just realise that, even a form such as the form of man, it might not be an image of Bob or Betty in the imagination, but at least it might be a confused image in the imagination. Now, because I have expressed some of this stuff, one of my colleagues in Ottawa, Dr. Russell, died unfortunately, He said one day, "You've got a photographic memory." I said, "What makes you say that?" I've never thought of it. I thought I had the worst memory in the world. He said, "You can remember particulars of things that none of us can remember." Well, that may or may not be, I don't know. But in any case, I never dwell on those things. But the image he had of man would be a confused image, like a common image. Or it may be of an animal. What about an animal? Is it a flea, I'm imagining? Or a giraffe? Or a snake? But I've got the concept of animal there. We'll come to that presently. Anyway, we abstract, draw away from the singular, as it were. We don't actually pull the form out of the thing. We form a form in the intellect, form another concept based upon that image out there. It's not a matter of dragging it out or it doesn't leap over from the image into the intellect. It's a case of the intellect performing the formation of this universal abstract form in the intellect. We're coming to more of that. We're going to do that in detail tonight a little bit. So the universal is a block of reality. This block of reality, man. Another block of reality, red. Another block of reality, cow. Another block of reality, walker, something walking. It's found in many, identified with each, and multiplied in them. The bottom of page 37. It's abstracted, or abstracted. An S is put in to make it easier to pronounce. Now at the top of page 38, the singular is concrete. Con, with or together, and cretus means grown over with, from the verb cresco in Latin. Cretus means grown over with, or to grow over with. What is grown over with? All the thisnesses, this colour, this size, this shape, in this place, etc. Joe is not an abstraction. He lives here now in this tall, in this, is this tall, and so on. He's the singular or individual. Now, how vast is the object of the intellect? It can know all things, as long as it's under the character of being, an existing thing. Whatsoever has the character of existing thing, we can form a concept of Lucifer. But we've got to think of it in terms of images, bodily things. Even when we talk about God, we have to think in terms of bodily things. If I told you about Dr. Russell, a strange fellow, lovable strangeness. God rest his soul. The last words anybody heard him say was, he looked around and said, "I'm still alive." He was dying. His body riddled with cancer. He phoned me and said, "My body's riddled with cancer." I said, "I'll pray for you, Tony." I knew him since I was 21, at the Aquinas Academy in Australia, and he died in Canada. But he looked around and he saw beings around him, still alive. So he was this tall, only short fellow. And it was funny hearing him refer to so-and-so, a little guy. This is very disappointing. I found that very funny one day. And he was trying to describe some fellow. He couldn't describe them adequately. And finally said, he's a little guy. He was very little himself. The first time a girl wrote to him and said, "Love, Jan," he nearly had a heart attack. No girl had ever written anything like that before, and he didn't know how to face it. He couldn't handle it. "Love, Jan." Girl from Australia wrote to him. Now, how vast is the object of the intellect? It can know all beings. It can know them all as universal. And because the intellect reflects over that universal and knows the singular from which the universal drew, we can know the singular. We sort of reflect and know that universal as coming from that singular. So when we're talking to Bob, we know him as a human person and we know him as this person at the same time. So we have to have things above man in a different way. We have to liken him to concrete things. So when we say God is magnificent, or God is, say, beautiful, his beauty is like the beauty of the tree, but it's not the beauty of a tree, it's more than the beauty of a tree. Likey, notty, mori. Reminded of a young gentleman, well, he wasn't quite so young, he was a little older than the other students. He was in my class at Niagara, and he went and entered a seminary somewhere over in the east. He rang me one day and said, we were having a vigorous discussion about something, and nobody could make sense. Then suddenly it hit me. I remember you saying, God is like a tree, he's not a tree, but he's more than a tree. Likey, notty, mori. And he said, everybody startled and said, where'd you get that from? That was genius, proper genius. But that was a typical Woodbury. Woodbury really pioneered the English language. He said Americans, by the way, wrecked the English language. And I'd go along with that with regard to philosophy. So a lot of the philosophers did a very bad job. So, but we can know all things superior to man, but by way of analogy, negation, and remotion. Woodbury, by the way, mentioned a particular example. When philosophers would say a tree is good, he said a lot of the American writers in philosophy would say it has agathological value. And he said the English are going that way now, because he was the pioneer really in Australia in many ways. I mean, universities have been going for a century before that, but he was the one that pioneered the real good, solid philosophy in the Catholic tradition, particularly.
Dr. Waters?
Yeah.
Could you go into more detail about the likey, natty, mori? That doesn't quite make sense to me.
It's just
I'm a teenager, I should understand made up words, but...
You're not a teenager, you look about 95 to me.
16.
Well, yes, I'll be very happy to do that. Can I visualize what God is? It's very difficult. He's been described as beautiful, he's been described as good, he's been described as perfect, he's described a thousands of ways. Well, the only way we can understand it, because we think in terms of bodily things. He's good. Chocolate's good. His goodness is not the goodness of chocolate, it's more than the goodness of chocolate. It's written in your text here, you see, that there's analogy, negation, and remotion. It's like the goodness of chocolate, his goodness. We get no other way of describing it. We've got to describe everything in terms of bodily things, you see. So we'd say it's like the goodness of a tree, but it's not the goodness of a tree, it's more than that. Ça fait du sens? That makes sense?
Yeah.
Good. Not the goodness of a tree, more than the goodness of a tree. I'm sorry. It's like the goodness of a tree, not the goodness of a tree, it's more than the goodness of a tree. The same with beauty and every other thing. We have to compare it with bodily things, always. The only way that the mind, intellect, can operate. So, we come to immanence versus objectivity. Let me highlight the problem first, which philosophers got tripped up by. Knowledge is within us, yet it's about something outside of us. Lots of philosophers are tripped up on that. Now, if you all got the diagram in front of you, or I put it on the board. On page 38. You could take one of these three things, and philosophers have been tripped up by it. Immanence, many say it remains within us, our minds, knowledge does. It's something we do within us. Objectivity, something we do about outside of us. And composition. Kant fell for that. Do we know things outside our mind? This is what Kant said. What I know is, say, the tree. It comes into my mind, and my mind tampers with the tree and forms a composite of the tree and my mind. The two together, compound. How much comes from the tree? We don't know. How much comes from the mind? We don't know. Kant said there are 12 categories of the mind. One of them is universality. One of them is unity. And the mind tampers with things. Are things like that out there? We don't know. Well, all we know is what's within us. And Descartes led him into that. They're the two, by the way. Catholic Descartes Protestant cant who led us into atheism in the contemporary world. So he saw that it compounded with the tree. The mind tampers with everything that comes into it, he thought, and misled a lot of people in Europe. If you took that away, the Second World War probably never started. The First World War, I'm sorry, yes. Or maybe the second too, I suppose, as a consequence, yes. Hitler was seething over that. He was made to sign the Treaty of Versailles. I stood there in Versailles, just outside the Palace of Versailles. Magnificent, the palace is beautiful. About 30 kilometres outside of Rome, outside of Paris. And I thought of Hitler in the train carriage there, signing the treaty, and he humiliated the French by making them sign the treaty or the surrender for the Second World War. Hitler was seething over that. He thought the Germans were humiliated. He, who wasn't even a German, by the way. So Aristotle and St. Thomas. No wonder Woodbury said, if Aristotle walked in this room now, I'd go down and kiss the ground he walked on. He was a great man. That old pagan. So immanence, namely, remains in the mind, and objectivity about something outside the mind. But a man like Bergson, who lived at the beginning of this last century and was the famous teacher of Maritain, Jacques Maritain, he said Maritain understood his philosophy better than anybody. And the one who criticised his philosophy the most was Maritain, by the way. He wrote a beautiful book destroying Bergson. But Bergson was a good man, but he made a mistake here. He said the two, he couldn't reconcile all those three: immanence, objectivity, and composition. So because he knew the mind is objective, he said there must be composition. There must be composition. Marx, the only man foolish enough in the history of the world to take all three and try to put them together: immanence, objectivity, and composition. Then Kant took immanence and composition. And he said we can't really know the external world as it is in itself. And this, he said, all we can know is the idea of a tree. Hegel was a very logical mind in Germany, and he said the idea of a tree is just another idea. No, the existence of a tree is just another idea, I'm sorry. So he said that Kant was wrong. And he said there is nothing out there. Nothing to exist out there at all. He said this. So the only thing you could have is, it's all in the mind, is immanence. And Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, the German triumvirate as they're called, those three men, they said that they went into idealism, that all is an idea. They had different variations, but the extreme one and most critical one and most obvious one is Hegel, that nothing exists outside the mind. And all the universities in the world up till the First World War, except the Catholic universities, were teaching Hegelianism. At Bonn, I stood outside the University of Bonn in Germany, and I thought to myself, oh boy, I'd love to turn back to see Marx, Hegel, and see how they're going, and see the history of things there in Germany. So Hegel said only the mind is active and produces its object. All is one big idea working itself out. Now I'd like to just deviate that from a minute. Yeah.
Like the monism of the Eastern religions, right? Everything is in the mind, and it's everything else on the outside.
The Eastern religions generally tend to be idealist. Yes, they generally tend. I've sat in on. Can't think of his name. A priest. His MA thesis. Father. What's his name? And I. We were the committee to be his readers and to examine him for his MA. And I asked him straight out, do you realise that you're tending, as it seems to me that you do in the East, towards the idealism. He said, oh yes, this priest who we're examining said. And they tend to think in terms of above the order of matter. A lot of these people see matter as evil. Yeah, it's not good. And they think in terms of something more elevated. And it's a lot better than a lot of our people in the English-speaking world and the Germans, etc. That's why I have some great respect for the peoples of the East. Their philosophies tend more to be elevated than the crass growth and stupid materialism of the Western world. Well, let me see what developed from that, which is not here, by the way. First of all, Hegel said he brought about what's called the dialectic. He said there is a thesis and an antithesis. Antithesis in human reasoning. Now, a thesis, for instance, a typical example is being and non-being. In fact, it's the most important one of the lot. There's a conflict between being and non-being. Don't ask me how you'd have a conflict with non-being. You can have a conflict with nothing. Out of that comes the synthesis. And he called it become. Out of the conflict of being with non-being, there is become. And this is called the dialectic. The word dialectic, dia in Greek means through, lect means to pick, like the intellect. The intellect means to pick within things. Lect, legere, to read or to pick. We got the word lex, meaning law, from that also. So the synthesis comes from the clash of opposites always. And that's very widespread in the world today. If you have a discussion group, you're bound to have the truth. And they get led on to some of these wild discussion groups like Pagan in TVO. You'll have a whole bunch of students there. And at the end of the session, they've all been discussing, what the hell came out of it? Nothing. Just a lot of words. One good philosopher could teach them in 5 minutes, more than they went on with an hour's discussion, contradicting each other. How many times do you waste time listening to something like that? Look at the stuff on the Bible at the moment they're going on with. It's all conjecture and pretty wild-eyed stuff at that. Now, Marx studied under successors of Hegel at the University of Bonn. And Marx saw this. You see, it's all spirit. And the dialectic is pretty good. You can have a discussion with that and look at the opposite and develop something out of it. Yes, you can do that. But it doesn't guarantee the truth, of course. Now, Marx, and so all is in the world of spirit. Marx said Hegel was magnificent. He, by the way, Marx and Feuerbach and people like that are called the young Hegelians. Feuerbach, F-E-U-E-R-B-A-C-H. Feuerbach. I think it's EU. I just forgotten now. And Hegel. There are a couple of others they call the young Hegelians, who followed in the line of Hegel in Germany. So Marx said this. This was truly magnificent and explained history. It said that Marx knew about 100 years of history only, and he drew everything out of that, which was, of course, rather foolish. He was an angry man. I sat in the very seats he sat on in the British Museum, I'm sure. I made sure I sat each day. I was there in a number of seats. So I said, one of them is bound to be the one that Marx sat in. And I nearly went to see his grave in London. I said, what am I wasting my time over that for? I saw Richard Taubes, the famous German singer. When I was a boy, my mother loved him and his singing. And I saw that and thought that was much more worth watching. Anyway, he sat in the British Museum, Marx did. I think I read somewhere recently where he'd never even been in Germany. Anyway, he had the idea of putting Hegel rather, back on his feet. Hegel's on his head. I'm going to put him on his feet. But it's commonly known that Marx put himself back on his head. He said all is matter, not all is spirit. He said there's dialectical materialism. Whoops, that's meant to be an L there. Materialism. So, thesis and its opposite, antithesis. Whoops. Antithesis. And the principal application of this is the bourgeoisie, those that own property. I think that's how you spell it. And the proletariat, those deprived of property. Now the clash of opposites again. This is interpreting history. Brings about the synthesis. And what is that? It's the dictatorship of the proletariat. And out of that would come the Soviet system. Soviets system. Which meant groups of men not owning anything. Groups of men surviving in this society, but nobody owning. Depriving man of ownership, which is anti-natural. So the dictatorship of the proletariat was to come first. In other words, when the proletariat, those deprived of land, took over. And as Frank Sheed said to us in Australia, I don't know whether you know, but Frank Sheed is an Australian. He and Sheed and Ward Publishing House in Great Britain were, when I was sort of in my 20s, 30s, teenagers, etc., was a very outstanding publishing house. Unfortunately, his son-in-law took over, and that seemed to destroy a lot of it. Frank Sheed's son-in-law. I met him in London, unfortunately, but anyway, that's another question. But it was a great Catholic centre of good literature. Well, Marx, and as Frank Sheed said to us, it'll never get beyond that. The dictatorship of the proletariat, any dictatorship won't let go once it's got it. That's exactly what happened. They never got to the true Soviet style. The Kremlin was like a fortress where they protected the dictatorship of those in charge. They never gave up the dictatorship, as is well known. So that was Marx's interpretation, the clash of the two. Now here's one of the great several contradictions. Bishop Fulton Sheen directed a thesis of a scholar who wrote his thesis on this very point. The contradictions, although I don't know that he had them all in, but the contradictions of Marxism. Here's one of them. Matter develops its own opposite, and out of the clash of the two will come this. He denied the principle of contradiction. Whatever undergoes movement is moved by another. So, why did they have the Communist Party? Great contradiction. They have the Communist Party and they insisted on bloodshed. That was why they put a pickaxe into the head of Trotsky, because he disagreed with the brutal, ruthless methods of forcing bloodshed on the people. The Communist Party would only accept bloodshed. They would not accept peaceful change. So the dictatorship of the proletariat was to be the result of this. Well, of course, the bosses took over. They wouldn't allow anybody else to take over. And the people who suffered the most was the proletariat. They suffered just as much as anybody else. and the Soviet system of all happily working together, nobody owning, and we're all pleased to be working. As I said at the medical conference in Buffalo years ago, Marx said that man is by nature a worker, a working animal. As I said to them there, he'd never been to Niagara University because our students thought that college was a 4-year loaf made out of Dad's dough. So,
Dr. Wood?
yes, I'm sorry.
All right, back to the Hegelian dialectic though. Doesn't that give rise, if this thesis, antithesis, giving rise to synthesis, then doesn't that become the new thesis? Which then splits up.
Oh,
into
yes,
thesis,
yes, it could-
antithesis, new synthesis. You
Yeah.
never arrive at truth that way.
Exactly, you
So
could go on
this-
and on and on, yeah.
Okay, so that's
And
the
in-
basis of relative.
Exactly, and that's
Oh.
exactly what I was getting at before when I said
Okay.
about these things on the television with Pagan, where he's renowned because he seems to get away with a lot of nonsensical stuff, and nothing ever arrives at anything. And I told him there are scientific proofs of the existence of God, and he just ignored it. So, yes, you're right, it goes on and on and on. But it didn't in the Soviet system. They made sure they got the people well under. If you read some of the stuff that's been produced by people in Poland, for instance, who suffered tremendously, both in the world wars and in this, under the Soviet system, and probably suffered as much, as not more than most people. So,
I just want to make sure I'm clear on this because it seems so pertinent. Aristotle and Thomas accepted immanence and objectivity.
yeah,
And the objectivity was what outside was real, and the immanence was in the mind.
that's right.
And Bergson
We
and Marx
outside, not
can't-
more than real, we know it.
All right.
We have knowledge of it. Go ahead.
But the composition was believed by Bergson, Marx, and Kant. What exactly is the composition? Is it a combination of those two?
No, but by who Kant? No, Kant spoke of.
Composition.
He said it's in the mind. What knowledge is in the mind, but it is a composite of reality. You see, a composite of the tree and my mind, something from my mind. And he gave 12 categories, and it's one of those categories. You see?
So they mixed those two together,
Yeah.
and then they lost their meaning.
Well, we say mix them together. That's not the best way to express it. They maintained those two. Where is knowledge? In the mind. What's it about? Something which is compounded with the external world. And we have to study hard to try and separate the external world from the categories in my mind. You see? So the others went logically further. Hegel was much more logical. He said that what was the point I was going to make there? Oh, that existence outside the mind, even that's an idea. We've got no guarantee there's anything outside the mind, you see? He saw that as another idea. We were given a passage from Hegel, in a course on Hegel, to study, and with 3 commentaries on it. I spent a week, day and night, batting my head against the wall. Koyre, K-O-Y-R-E, was one man. And there was a Marxist, I think, and a Hegelian, and a traditional philosopher, the commentaries. I couldn't help but opt towards what I'd studied with Woodbury. And I got top marks for that. But if I'd have been left to my own devices, I don't think I'd have made any sense out of any of it. Because the Germans write a whole page, one sentence. You've had that experience, Joe? Yeah, one sentence. And they say about the Germans, what was the beginning of this sentence? When you get to the end, what the hell were we talking about? Joe, of course, is a German professor, and it's they say that you don't understand often at the end of it what he set out to, or you wonder if he knew what he was setting out to prove. And so it was very difficult to read some of this stuff. And by the way, we was given it in French too. Well, one was in English and all the others were in French. I think one might have been even in Latin, I can't remember now. But oh dear, a graduate student looking at that saying, what the heck do I condemn for this for? So, anyway, that's an aside, but it shows you the way the world went. And, as I mentioned the other night with Gallipoli, etc., The World War could have been stopped, the First World War, and no doubt the Second World War might never have happened if things had been carried out wisely instead of something that's very special to one nation as pride of the English. So, unfortunately, they're well known for that. The certain people in Whitehall, where the naval headquarters is, and English aristocracy that were leaders in these things in the war, all guarding their domain. I'm in charge here, this kind of thing. Sometimes, as Mr. Minari said earlier tonight, it requires men to be prudent and to behave correctly. I have some English blood, I have some Irish blood and Italian blood. When I was in hospital, I was bleeding. I'm not sure which was coming out. So, anyway, there we are. So dialectical materialism, as my friend said to a communist publicly once at a big gathering, he said, "What's dialectical materialism?" It was obvious, he said he couldn't answer it. But my friend, Father Ansia, who was in plain clothes, he could answer it. But anyway, so now the source of man on page 38, little c there. The source of man's intellective knowledge, the role of bodies and senses. What we know by sense knowledge is this tree outside of me. Now note, sense knowledge knows this tree. Object of the human intellect is form as found in bodily things. In other words, tree. Just tree. Not this tree or that tree, but just the universal judgment tree. And definitions, by the way, as we study in logic, definitions explain the natures of things. That's what definitions do. Through specific difference and genus, define the species. We'll see more of that another time. Everything we know has its source in bodies and is known in terms of bodily form. Compare language, for instance. Even our knowledge of God starts this way, and underlying and anything else superior to man. We are in a certain way tied to bodies, but as they are actual, they specify or actualize our knowledge. Not potential. I'm not looking at a potential tree, I'm looking at an actual tree. It has to be actual because I have to have a form to inform my knowledge. Terribly important that. The power of sight, for instance, is merely a power which says I can see. The act of seeing means I do see. I don't say my sight sees, I say I see using my sight. I think using my intellect. I walk using my power of locomotion. So the form of green moves the power from potency to act. Just as hot water, the form of heat in the hot water moves the spoon to go from can be hot to does be hot. We know that we can see because we do see. We can't know things through powers, through potency. We know them through actuancies. Note that the concept in the intellect is universal, but the image in imagination is singular, always. Did you hear about the man came home from work? He was hot and bothered, very hot and bothered, this hot summer day, and he sat down in front of the television. He said to his wife, "Bring me a beer, will you, before it starts?" She brought him a beer. Later, "Bring me another beer before it starts." Later, "Bring me another beer before it starts." He said, "You lazy, good-for-nothing thing. What are you going to do, sit there all night drinking beer and watching television?" He said, "It started." Take a break. Gloriously, very funny.